I think everyone's been put on mute automatically at this stage, apart from us here in Auckland and Matthew. But we do have the ability to do Q&A, so we've got a little feature in there that you should be able to find where you can ask some questions. So as you think of anything through the webinar, please feel free to pop a question into there, and we'll be reading those, and when we get towards the end of the session, then we can we'll throw those questions at Matthew, and I'm sure he'll do a great job in answering them. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge New Zealand Security Association for jointly hosting this with ACES. And it's great to get the two organisations together for this, and it's obviously a pretty important subject at this point in time with what we've gone through in the last few months, and a lot of the changes that have been happening for organisations in terms of their IT and how they've been using it, i.e. taking lots of computers home and putting files in all sorts of weird places and trying to deal with work from home. But it's also a time when there's particularly cyber criminals seeing a lot of opportunity to jump in and try new ways of getting hold of our data and eventually our money, which is really what the main game is. So firstly, to kick things off, I'd like to welcome in Gary Morrison, CEO of the NZSA, just to say a few words. Gary?
Thanks, Grant. And first of all, thank you to Matthew for making his time available today. Looking forward to the presentation. This is the first of a series of webinars that we will now start running, probably every 2 months. So if you have any subject matters which you'd like us to cover, by all means drop us a note and we'll look to find specialists in those areas that we can cover off. Big thanks to Nori and ACES for jointly hosting today, much appreciated. And I know we have a close relationship, and this just brings that relationship even closer. Just a couple of minor matters from the NZSA point of view. We've launched our good practice guideline document today. This is a recognised ACOP, code of practice, approved code of practice, covering the guarding sector, and it comes out of the tragic death back in 2011 of one of our security officers, and the NZSA has taken a lead in developing this document with a lot of input from E2, WorkSafe, a number of our customers, and a lot of providers. So it's been a lot of consultation on the document. It's available on our website to download. It's quite a large document, and we will be adding some other chapters or sections in the near future around hospital security and event security. So that process is underway now. And also just a quick reminder about our annual awards program. Nominations are now open, ready for our live streamed event early August. So please put through your nominations. And thank you very much for attending. I'll look forward to the presentation today. Thanks, Grant.
Great. Thank you, Gary. So we're just about ready to kick off. For those that don't know, introducing Matthew Evetts, who is the Chief Technical Officer of Optic Security Group and also part of Optic Digital, which is a subset of that organisation. And we're very thankful for Matthew for joining us today to talk about the new threat. He's got a bunch of interesting areas to talk about. So with no further ado, we will kick things off, and I will just shortly hand over to Matthew to kick things off. So Matthew, the floor is yours.
Cheers, thank you, and thanks for having me, everyone. Appreciate this is people's lunch break, and I'm sure that we can get some interesting and useful information across over the next little while. There will be plenty of time for questions too. So while I'm talking, please feel free to jot some questions down in that Q&A feature that we talked about earlier. I think that tends to be where the gold nuggets come out as we answer people's questions, answer what's kind of pertinent in front of mind for people on these topics. So yeah, more than happy to answer any question around the whole cybersecurity front, and hopefully as we work through the handful of slides that I've got here, there'll be that will kind of trigger some questions in your minds as well. So we're covering a few subjects today, and they're really all around how to operate in the current environment. And we're very much trending towards this situation anyway, even before COVID-19, where the traditional boundaries of the corporate network and the organisational network had disappeared or were disappearing long ago, and we needed to take quite a different approach to cybersecurity, and going into so much remote working really just accelerated what was an existing trend. So I will go over the following topics, but I'll avoid getting down to the weeds too much, and obviously you can ask some questions if you like some further detail on any of the areas that we cover. And what I've done is I've tried to cover areas that will be both useful to your own businesses and also that you can advise your customers on as well. So the topics we're covering are securing PCs, especially when people are working remotely, securing company data on people's phones, different methods for secure remote access to corporate applications and data, phishing and user awareness training, protecting the Internet of Things, so IoT devices, all those kind of edge devices which are sitting on our networks now, and then just a bit about good maintenance. So there we go, next slide, just making sure that was working. So securing PCs, whole bunch of things we could talk about on this front, obviously. I'm going to just cover a few key areas around this that actually apply to us as individuals in terms of how we can secure our own PCs when working remotely. But these are also, these points are also a great place to start for organizations that are implementing more secure remote working as well. So they really do apply across both. You know, even if you're you know, a person that is trying to provide a bit more security for yourself, then these should be useful things that you can do if you're not doing them already. So first up, your home network is not your work network. So it sounds obvious, but what that means is that when you're connecting a work PC to a home network, that home network, whether you're connecting wirelessly or wired, should actually be set up as a public network. So sometimes when you connect to a home network, it might default to it being a trusted network, or you might accept that it's a trusted network. We recommend that you actually treat it as an untrusted network. And the other thing, just to check in relationship to home networks, is really to ensure that your home router passwords are not set to the defaults. Usually those routers come set up as with some kind of default password, even if it's not admin, and it could be something else which is probably well known to all the threat actors out there. So, you know, make sure that that is changed as well. So point 2, install endpoint protection. So if you're running Windows 10 with Windows Defender and it's up to date, that is actually a great free option. It works pretty well. But when working with business data, having an additional layer of endpoint protection is advantageous. So some of the more advanced endpoint solutions that we could deploy to a business machine actually help detect patterns of suspicious behavior across multiple machines and accounts. So it's much broader than just kind of the environment that you're working in. And they also help enforce organizational policies and then help organizations respond to threats if they do occur as well. So having more of a business-focused endpoint protection can be a good idea. And number 3, turn on multi-factor authentication. When we say turn on MFA, multi-factor authentication, we mean turn it on everything. So it's actually one of the easiest ways to protect accounts and data. And some security analysts are now saying that it pretty much eliminates all account hijacking. So once you've got MFA in place, it's extremely rare for an account to be hijacked, which is one of the main ways that data is stolen. And so we highly recommend turning on MFA on everything you do, whether that be a website that you're accessing, your actual machine, whatever, you know, certainly any sensitive areas of your organization or your data, you want the MFA in place. However, for MFA to work, you really also then need to make sure you're protecting your phone, because usually MFA is done via your phone, so you need to know where it is at all times, and obviously we want things like automatic locking and passcodes to be in place on the phone. And I'll talk a little bit more about phones later, but they're certainly relevant to MFA. So that was point 4. Point 5 under securing PCs, privacy. So particularly when some of us are working in more public environments, or we've got a shared workspace under these kind of new remote working situations, Think about who can see your screen, who can hear work calls, and sort of think about how you're connecting and just who is around you. So just got to be a bit more mindful about that. Another one not directly related to IT and cyber is just the idea of team communication. So with so many more people working remotely too, and I think, you know, we're certainly seeing a trend towards remote working, you know, being a part of people's normal work week much more than it used to be before. Over communicating with team members is actually going to be important, because not only does it avoid the normal kind of workplace misunderstandings and missing actions and things like that, but it actually really helps with security. So it's much harder for bad actors to socially engineer outcomes when we're in, you know, regular and open contact with our teams. And then last up under this section, update early and always. So the majority of updates that come out are security related, or at least have a security aspect in them. And what we're talking about when we say updates is actually all of the software and hardware that you're using needs to be really regularly updated. So it's not, we're not just talking about Windows, we're not just talking about, you know, your HP updates if you've got an HP laptop. It's everything that you're running. Obviously, when updates come out for software and hardware, they do include feature updates too, but they pretty much always include some kind of bug fix or security fix. And in nearly all cases, it's best to apply those updates straight away. Sometimes the update regimes do get a bit of bad press because they introduce problems as well. But from a security perspective, having those updates applied early and often makes an enormous difference. And if the machines in your organization are company controlled, then we can then automate that update process as much as possible, so you're not actually having to worry about it. But it's not just about automating Windows updates, and Windows 10 does that pretty well anyway. It's about applying patches across the hardware and software that your workers are going to be using, regardless of whether they're inside your corporate network or outside it. Oh, we were already on the next slide without me knowing it. Sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen. So, securing company data on phones. So as most of you probably experience on a day-to-day basis, so much work is done from our phones now, but phone security tends to be one of those things that's on the to-do list, but probably near the bottom, never quite get around to really doing all the things that you need to do in terms of to secure phones, particularly within organizations where phones might be company issued, or even if they're not company issued, a lot of work is being done on those phones, a lot of company data is being accessed on those. So there are a bunch of things you can do to make phone security a whole lot better, or the access of company data on people's phones. And those techniques can actually be applied across a whole range of devices, whether that be a laptop or a PC, or just the phones that people are using. So I've got 8 areas today that I want to talk about in terms of phones. It gives an idea of just how much we can do in this space. And as I said, really worth investing in these kind of security measures, because they are actually helping you secure all your devices out there. And the devices which are kind of in the wild, connecting to the internet, range of different internet connections, that kind of thing, are one of your biggest risk points when it comes to cybersecurity. Let me just take a quick drink because I'm doing far too much talking. So 8 points. Number 1, mobile device management, or MDM. So some of you may have heard of this. Really, it's used for the administration of mobile devices, such as, you know, smartphones, tablets, laptops. So anything that's kind of out in the world there can be applied to PCs as well. So MDM gives us the control to actually restrict settings and applications, how those applications are used, how data is accessed, and that data aspect is the most important thing. So it really allows us to control and manage the use of company data on that device. So many of you will be using Microsoft solutions. The Microsoft MDM solution is Intune, and depending on your Office 365 licensing, this actually comes included, or you can purchase it as an add-on. And it's one of the easiest ways to provide device management and security, whether that be, you know, being able to apply patches or apply some kind of security policy. So with MDM in place, we can even, you know, take quite extreme actions like completely wiping a device, or you know, removing whole applications from the device and things like that. So it's a very powerful way to really protect your company assets. Number 2, mobile application management, MAM. Mobile application management is more commonly used for where you've got to bring your own device type scenario. People might be using their own laptops or phones. It doesn't go as far as having the full device management features of an MDM product. But what it means is that you can restrict which applications on those devices can then access company accounts and data, which gives you a lot more control about how that data is accessed and used, and whether it's being accessed and used in the right ways. So an example of that is if you're running, an Android phone or an Apple phone, they will come with a native mail app, and you'd be able to connect that native mail app to Microsoft Exchange, Office 365. With mobile application management, you can restrict it so that people can only use the Microsoft Outlook application on those phones to access that data, and so immediately you're able to control some of the parameters around that. So pretty easy to roll out, not actually very widely used, and so it's one of those tools within easy reach that we can apply and roll out. Number 3, conditional access. So conditional access are really just simple if-then statements. They're policies that get rolled out. And what they mean is that if a user wants access to a resource, then they must comply with the parameters or complete a certain action in order to be able to get that access. So conditional access can be used in conjunction with MAM and MDM solutions. And what conditional access does is it actually helps ensure security both inside and outside of the corporate network. So for instance, if a New Zealand user is logging in from Australia, the policy may be set to automatically block that attempt. You might not even have any users in Australia, so why would that user be logging in? So it's a really easy way to just provide another kind of layer of security around your devices. Number 4, restricting public networks. So ensuring devices are not accessing public networks drastically reduces your risk of attack. Public networks, we very much always treat public networks as a high security risk. So for instance, if I'm staying at a hotel when I'm visiting my team in Auckland, I don't connect to the hotel Wi-Fi. That probably sounds a bit extreme, but it's just reducing the attack vectors against my machine. So wherever you can avoid the likes of public networks, that's a great idea. You can restrict that with policy. If your people do need to connect to public networks, that is where we would use a VPN to help secure the device and the traffic coming and going from that device. Number 5, device encryption. So encrypting a device essentially ensures that the data can't be accessed unless the device is decrypted, which means that you've got to have valid credentials for that device. So pretty much all modern smartphones, tablets, laptops do support device encryption, but it's usually not turned on. So the most recent releases of things like your Samsung Android-based phone or your Apple phone, they do actually have it turned on by default. That's in the more recent releases. But your Windows device is not going to have it turned on by default. You actually have to turn that on. So really good idea to turn on device encryption. I'll talk a bit more about that later as well. Number 6, data loss prevention, or DLP, as some people might know that as. These are really just a set of policies that help ensure end users do not send sensitive or critical information outside of your corporate network, or maybe they don't send it to outside of an approved list of recipients. So it's another feature that's available within the Microsoft stack. It's available through other product lines as well. It can help avoid some really major data breaches, because a huge number of data breaches are actually just plain old human error, or really just sending on information that people don't realize that they shouldn't have sent on. And DLP is a great way to protect against that. Closely related to DLP is digital rights management, or DRM. It's really a way of supporting the copyright protection for digital media. So the purpose of DRM is to prevent unauthorized redistribution of digital media and restrict that unauthorized access. So let's just say I wanted to send this slide pack out along with the notes, but I didn't want it going wider than this audience. Then I could apply some kind of DRM to that, so that really you would have to prove who you were in order to access this slide pack. And then finally, number 8 under this section of securing company data on people's phones enforce strong passwords and biometrics. So another thing that's really not done enough, very simple to do, strong passwords alongside biometric options such as fingerprint authenticators actually make unauthorized access nearly impossible when it comes to people trying to get into a device. Really, really difficult. And this can easily be enforced by that conditional access, which I was talking about a little later. So you can set up policies on your corporate network so that when people are trying to gain access to your corporate network, they'll have valid credentials. You can then test for whether they've got a strong password or not. And if they don't, you can deny them access, so that you can actually enforce strong passwords, and we really do recommend that. And this also might be a good time to think about rolling out a password management solution if you don't already, because if we're going to do strong passwords, it can be really easy to manage them all, and having a management solution in place can make that a lot easier. So, for instance, in my password management solution, which I've personally been using for about 12 years now, I think from memory, I've got 400 different account passwords in there. So there's no way I'm going to remember 400 different passwords. And if you're a business, you could have a lot more than that. Righty-ho, just going back to the presentation. Great, so we're on to methods for secure remote access to company files and systems. So quite closely related to some of the things I've already talked about, but this is where, regardless of whether you're remote working or not, or whether that's even a big part of your organization, these methods are really kind of core to protecting organizational data. So even if you've only got the occasional necessity for remote work, most organizations have some kind of data or applications that are only available within their corporate network. So you need a secure way of reaching into that corporate network or into those applications that will still protect all that intellectual property and those corporate assets. So here are just a few approaches which I put together around how you can protect remote access into those those applications and data which are held within kind of the parameters of your corporate network. So first up, securing your when I talked about securing PCs for remote access, deploy some centrally managed endpoint protection. So if you're an organization rather than an individual, we actually recommend deploying centrally managed endpoint protection, and that's more than just standard antivirus. So a centralized management means that you've got well-protected machines that are accessing your corporate network, and you can actually guarantee that you can see whether the machine's got the endpoint protection on it. You can see when it was last updated. You can see whether there are any anomalies, and it also makes deploying that software a lot easier as well. So centralized management or centrally managed endpoint protection. Like we've just discussed, consider deploying MDM and MAM policies. So this will really help protect your company data even when on personal devices. So if you've got that people coming in and accessing data within your corporate network, you really do want that MDM and MAM in place. Okay, so number 3, manage internet connections and Wi-Fi remotely using by deploying securely cloud managed equipment for your staff. So it's not something we saw much of before COVID-19, but it's definitely something that we're seeing become more common. And really what this means is that rather than relying on what your staff or your customers might have at home in terms of a router and Wi-Fi and things like that, you're actually giving them a piece of equipment that you're managing centrally. And so all of those devices will talk to a central control point. You can ensure that they're patched. You can ensure that there's a great firewall acting there. Password policies being applied, all that kind of stuff. So actually giving your staff equipment or working with your customers to get their staff good equipment can be a really good idea when it comes to protecting the access of company data. Number 4, ensure devices are set to encrypt data at rest. And by using a product like BitLocker, which comes with your professional versions of Microsoft Windows, this means that when devices are lost or stolen, it's much less likely to be an issue because they've got to then have valid credentials to be able to access that data. So any data that's stored on any device, whether that be a server sitting in your internal server room or a laptop that's going out the door, really has to have that data encryption at rest activated. Number 5, use a VPN. Some of you will be already doing this. Even though VPNs have been around for a very long time, it's still actually a great way to protect a connection from a remote device into a corporate network and really just protect all that traffic that traverses that device. If you're already managing the devices or managing those routers and things that are sitting with your staff, maybe in their home location, setting up VPNs becomes even simpler. You don't even need a client-side VPN. It can just be a point-to-point connection. And then another way we can actually do things now, which can be really beneficial to organizations where VPNs could become complex or a high overhead, is that we can use a software-based access control and encryption platform. And that removes the requirement for the VPN, but enables staff to create a direct connection into the applications which happen to be hosted within your corporate network and do that in a secure manner. So it's almost transparent to the staff. They're able to just create the connection to the application essentially by opening it or putting the URL into the browser. But in the background, we have this software there working, which essentially it does the same thing as what a VPN connection would do. So number 6, make full use of secure cloud services. A lot of you will be using things like Office 365 or Salesforce already. But what we see is a lot of really poorly configured services, particularly from a security perspective, and that includes pretty much every implementation of Office 365 we see. So there's the flip side of that is that usually cloud services are a whole lot more secure than local services. They're better maintained, and the providers of those cloud services spend an absolute truckload of money on security. But you still need to do your own configuration correctly, ensure that your own accounts have got things like secure passwords and all that kind of good stuff. But using secure cloud services can be a great way to just minimize your security risk across the board. Last but not least, in this section, don't forget backup. So when all else fails, backup is the last and arguably the most important line of defense against a cyber attack. Most Office 365 implementations are not backed up. Microsoft, contrary to popular belief, does not do backup for you. It does disaster recovery, but if a bad actor was to go in and delete your data and empty the recycle bin and you didn't discover that for a while, Microsoft eventually removes its own fallback data. And so if you haven't got your own backup, you're in a lot of trouble. If it's not Microsoft, or it's another cloud service, or it's some kind of local service that you're running, again, backup's going to be absolutely essential. The amount of ransomware attacks has actually increased over COVID-19, and the only way to get out of a ransomware attack, unless you're going to actually pay the ransom, is to have a great backup that's actually tested. You know that it works, you can rely on it. And it's also, a great fallback position if you have some sort of other technical issue or data compromise. So don't forget backup, regardless of what application or data that you're using. Phishing. So all of you will have heard the term. You probably prefer to do it on the water rather than talk about it in cyberspace. It is by far the most common attack vector for any kind of cyber activity, particularly in New Zealand. New Zealand has a higher rate of successful phishing attacks than other parts of the world. And when I say phishing, it could be phishing or some variant of phishing. You probably heard, you may have heard terms like spear phishing, whaling, things like that. Phishing is essentially a social engineering attack. Social engineering is really just are using some smarts to convince people to do something that they wouldn't normally do. One of the reasons why phishing is so prevalent is it's actually relatively cheap to orchestrate. It's also very effective. They get a good hit rate, and the attacks can be very sophisticated. So it can be quite difficult to detect those attacks. So in New Zealand, it's estimated that about half of all cybersecurity incidents are related to phishing. But to properly combat phishing, every organisation needs both good tools and great user awareness training. So even then, some things will make it through, but if you cover both the tools and the user awareness training, your security risk around phishing is reduced exponentially. And in fact, because so many cyber attacks are delivered via this vehicle, right across the board, you're going to reduce your security risk substantially just by addressing the risks around social engineering and phishing. So for most organizations, they may have put, some good mail filtering in. That filtering may be working pretty well for them, but the user awareness training piece is what's missing. And so when we talk to an organization, they may have done user awareness training once, they may not have done it at all. They could have some great tools in place, but this is the missing piece for them. So the slide that I've got in front of you now should be showing a cat poking over a desk. It just shows 4 steps that we regard as kind of the big, heavy pillars of a good awareness training program. So really the key that we're trying to get across here, or the keys that we're trying to get across here, is that you must test your users. And this is the same thing you can talk to your customers about as well. They must test their users. Just training is not enough. You have to do that testing. And then the other big one is to remember is that awareness training and testing, the testing that goes with it in awareness training, has to be ongoing. So if you look at those 4 boxes that you've got on the side there, essentially you're doing those in a loop forever. So it can't, user awareness training and the testing cannot be a set and forget approach. Sadly, one of the things that we really have to continually remind staff about is to be skeptical of everything. So core to being protected against social engineering is really to be very skeptical about anything that comes in that you're not 100% sure about. And we have to be baking this into our businesses. So protection against phishing and social engineering more generally really does have to be baked into the way that you do business in order for you to be protected. And as I said, the prevalence of these attacks is very high. A lot of businesses have had issues with this, so it's definitely time and money well spent. Righty ho. Next up, IoT. So I thought this was particularly relevant to this audience. Many of you will be dealing with connected devices on a daily basis as part of your security work, and particularly things like cameras and card readers. And there are a bunch of stuff that we really need to be sure of when it comes to cybersecurity because of the way these connected devices work. And so when we say IoT, we essentially mean anything that's connected to the edge. So it's kind of not core in the network. It may have an internet connection. It may just have a network connection, but it's not like a PC where we know the name of the PC, we know the name of the person that's logging into it. It's a device that's sitting on the network or sitting on the internet, which is sending us data, and that data could be quite important. It could be quite sensitive. So first up, ensure all network traffic from these IoT devices is encrypted. Even more so when it's wireless traffic, and wirelessly connected IoT devices are becoming more and more common. Where IoT devices don't support encryption, and I know a lot of them don't, I really would encourage people to install additional equipment and all software so that the clear text signals that those devices are sending can't be intercepted or can't be tampered with. And so what we're saying is really to create encryption of that traffic independent of whatever constraints that the device might present. We also really want to audit each device to ensure that it's got secure configuration. So for example, does that device have unique login details? If you've got 100 devices on a site, what we're actually saying, and I know this doesn't sound too much fun. What we're saying is that every one of those 100 devices should have a unique login. Use multi-factor authentication where that is supported. Unique encryption keys where you've deployed encryption keys to devices, check that phone home features are configured correctly, and then obviously the physical access to those device controls can be an important consideration as well. You know, can people actually physically get at the device and tamper with it? Things like doing a hard reset. If you did a hard reset down to the defaults of the device by physically accessing it, can that device still access the corporate network? In a lot of cases, the answer would be yes. Another thing to look at is to implement firewalling and network segmentation across all IoT devices. So what we're saying is that you actually want to include firewall inspection of all the internal network traffic to contain incidents if they do occur. So if you've got a whole bunch of cameras or other sensors that might be connected into a corporate network, we want to pass a lot of that traffic at least through a basic firewall so we can start to pick up any anomalies that might be happening. And we definitely want to segment that traffic at the network layer away from other network traffic, just to help protect the overall corporate network. And we also want to ensure that there's proactive monitoring in place, and that should be an analysis of the IoT traffic to really find and eliminate threats and vulnerabilities as they occur. So being proactive rather than waiting for a threat to come to the surface. And in fact, if we wait, we often don't know that something's happened. We don't know that data is being stolen, all that kind of thing. Device patch management, another really important one. Include automated patching wherever you can, and obviously make sure that patching is really proactive. And then also malware scanning in devices. So where you can, being able to malware scan the device or the traffic that's coming from that device can be really helpful, because these devices are a vector for actually introducing malware onto the network. So in short, around IoT, what we're saying is monitor and map all connected devices, apply network segmentation, that's a super important one, secure all your network traffic, and really use best practice configuration. I'm really looking forward to the questions because I feel like I've been talking for a very long time. So, good maintenance is good security. Arguably, the most common issue in the cybersecurity space, after things like phishing and other forms of social engineering, is what we just call poor hygiene. So poor hygiene is passwords and certificates not being changed regularly, config not completed on install, and the big one I think of whenever the word maintenance is used is patching. So we all know that organizations practice poor maintenance in all sorts of ways, whether that be physically or digitally, but it does have really big security ramifications. So a faulty physical door is an entrance for a data breach, just like an unpatched door control server is. So it's definitely not about just digital. You know, data breaches happen because poor maintenance happens on a multitude of fronts. So this is a great time when organizations are starting to replan, rethink about where their risks are, try and protect the organizations for the next few years. It's a great time to be thinking about whether good maintenance schemes are in place, really ensuring that every piece of equipment and software in the organization has some kind of service plan wrapped around it. So we're not asking organizations to spend big money, that's not it at all, but we are asking them to invest in maintaining their existing investments, so don't let those investments become a security liability for the organization. We find a lot of businesses are still using really out-of-date software on both end-user machines and servers, and even more who have poorly patched and maintained network equipment and endpoint devices like cameras. So, they may be applying their Microsoft updates on their user machines, but they haven't touched their network switches for 3 years. So it's definitely not a situation you want to be in. It's kind of just opening the door to the next threat actor that comes along. So just doing more patching can very easily be the difference between an unrecoverable breach that really just brings the organization to its knees, and that organization just being able to continue operating business as usual. And that pretty much brings us to question time.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Before we just go through the questions that we've got, I've just got a couple of points myself. I just wanted to throw at you.
Yeah, please do.
There was the recent, I was reading the other the recent New Zealand Incident Response Bulletin, and they actually talked about what's been happening, since COVID-19 in regards to cybersecurity and this, and it was really some interesting pieces, and this more from a personal level, but you talked about the whole phishing piece, which is massively important. One of the things they're seeing, and it didn't specifically say for New Zealand, but they've been seeing it in other countries, is the contact tracing being used to contact people. So essentially they are sending SMS messages to people and saying you've been in contact with someone who's got COVID-19 and you need to send us these details and you need to do this and that, and eventually gets to the point where they're handing across things such as tax file numbers or social security numbers, as they call them in the US. And I think what it really highlighted was that these threats, these people that are doing this stuff, are incredibly nimble, and they're looking at opportunities all the time and adapting to what's going out there. The other one that they were looking at as well was they're seeing a big upswing in unemployment benefit fraud. This is not particularly related to IT, but again, it's really an example of where these people are looking to attack organisations and people and governments in this case to basically get money out of them. So just absolutely incredible in the short period of time how they managed to adapt, because apparently what they're also seeing is it's actually a lot harder for them now, particularly because the courier companies are having trouble doing the deliveries. That a lot of the fraud in the past has been based on deliveries, so they will intercept deliveries and they use they call them mules, I think, who then receive the packages instead of the person who's meant to get it. That's dropped, so now they're looking at other things such as I said, such as fake kind of tracking type systems to do this.
Yeah, and look, it is incredibly profitable. If they can steal someone's identity, which is much easier these days due to the sheer amount of information about individuals that's available, then their identity can be worth a lot of money to the wrong people. So the people that orchestrate the attack are often just selling those details on to others to use. And in terms of organized crime worldwide, cyber is by far the biggest earner now worldwide out of all organized crimes. In fact, I think it's eclipsed all other types of organized crime combined in terms of an earner. So it's well funded. There's a lot of motivation there to orchestrate it, and it does make it very difficult for organizations to keep up with the threat actors out there. So I think what we really just encourage organizations to do is do the basics really well. And if you can do more than the basics, that's great. But so many of these attacks are successful because the basics are not being done right in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. I think I read in SC magazine that they're looking at a 50% increase so far. That's in the UK in cyber attacks during COVID-19. So that's a pretty massive increase.
Yeah.
I've just got a couple of quick questions here that have come through. You mentioned the password security software you've been using yourself for about 14 odd years or so. What was that particular one? I think we can use brand names here, but if you want to string off a couple of them, just interested.
Yeah, so I would recommend looking at, particularly if you are considering implementing it across an organization. So there's some software out there that's fine for just individuals to use, but at an organization level, I'd look at products like LastPass and Dashlane. Look, they're not bulletproof, but they are better than using the same passwords across multiple accounts. And other than my super sensitive passwords like banking, I pretty much put everything in the password manager. So there are a bunch of them available. If you just want one for yourself, I'd recommend going to Wired Magazine, and they have an article there. Just look under Password Manager that lists all the ones that are great for personal password management, and they list a combination of paid and free ones under there as well.
Brilliant, fantastic. Also, there was mention of, you mentioned the software for the central control of endpoint management. So this is where we've got software that all the computers in the organisation, be it 5 or 10 or 500, that they can be managed from a central point. Any kind of brand names or solutions there that you could name drop?
Yeah, I mean, we work with a bunch of different vendors around that. The couple of vendors which we have just done some more recent research on, which are looking really promising in terms of just the sheer breadth of protection and response that they provide, would be the Fortinet endpoint protection, and the advantage here is that it also then links into a bunch of the other firewall and networking products that they have, in terms of almost like a single pane of glass for threat analysis. And then Carbon Black is another really good one for organizations wanting to deploy advanced endpoint protection to their devices. But there are some other great products out there as well, but there are a couple which have got very good credentials.
Brilliant, fantastic. Now, just a reminder for everyone else who's on there, if you want to submit a question, you can just drop it into the thing, and another one's just popped up here now.
I'm just reading that now.
Oh, you're reading that? Oh, you can read it. You can see that. Brilliant. I'll let you read that while you're doing that. I'll read it out. Oh, do you want me to read it out first for those?
Yes, yeah, good point. Okay. Yeah.
The question is from Charlie. Often find during risk reviews that the client's physical security application server is a PC, and in a lot of cases running obsolete software, i.e. Windows XP, Windows 7. Integrators will tell the client it's okay as long as it's not on the external network, and or that you turn off updates. We then find these machines have remote connection via things such as Team Talk, and it's really common. Is there a particular software product or tool available that can be run on a PC to highlight and report on config set for these types of vulnerabilities?
Yeah, there is. So internally and for our customers, we use a product called ConnectWise Automate. So it was previously called LabTech, and then the ConnectWise brand bought them out. There are other products that do pretty much the same thing as well. So we use that product to both deploy agents to all machines, but also to scan the network for anything that might not have an agent on it, and then we can start to dig a bit deeper and make sure that those machines have some proper monitoring and things on them. So, for instance, you say there that it's got a remote connection, then the idea would be that being that it's obviously got some kind of internet connection, we would have an agent on that machine, and we could then monitor the status of its patching, and what it was, and also what kind of network traffic it was generating as well. A good network deployment will also pick up the traffic that's coming from machines that might not have access to the wider network too. So let's say it's connected to the corporate network, but it's segmented off, still talking to the internet. You can use the tools on the firewall or the network control software to actually check A, on the status of that machine and its updates, and B, what network traffic is actually traversing that machine. The instance that you're talking about where the physical security application server is out of date, and we actually see that a lot as well. Even though it might not have access to the corporate network, it's still something that we would really recommend against, because it only takes someone to accidentally connect into the wider network, or for someone to access that server and take down your cameras or whatever it might be controlling, and you've got a major issue on your hands. So the amount of money it costs to update them is nothing compared to the amount of money that could be lost if something went wrong.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. And we've got one other one here in terms of, you mentioned when we were talking about IoT, and we talked about things such as the security camera, which is obviously relevant for this audience here. But from a personal level, what kind of IoT devices are we talking about that potentially might have in the home, that the kids might have bought? Internet fridges.
Yeah.
What are we talking about?
Yeah, great question. the more and more of the things that we bring into our workplaces and homes are connected to the internet or to some kind of network now. I mean, in my home alone, I think I've got 2 different devices which control lights. You know, the cars have update services which talk to the mobile phone. You know, so there's just so many different things that can be accessed. I think the you know, there's some instances, particularly in the home, where you're simply not going to be able to protect against that device, you know, potentially being compromised. But what we can do is ensure that it's not holding any personal data. That would be a really big one, because sometimes people are, you know, will load up profiles and things in these devices which are unnecessary. So don't load, you know, personal information in them that is not necessary. Same with the whole, you know, default password thing on a router. Any device that you buy, you should be changing the password on it, storing that in your password manager that you've just set up. You know, so that's exactly what I do for both home and work devices. Everything gets a really complex password. And if you're really astute, you'll change those every so often as well. Always worth having probably a decent router / firewall that these devices are connecting through to. You've got to have an internet connection somehow. That there'll be a device that's orchestrating the internet connection. I personally just make sure I've got a slightly better than average device which has got a half decent firewall running on it. It doesn't cost much money, but it's better than whatever the telco issues me on day one.
Brilliant, great one. I've got another question popped in here from Dennis. I'll read that out for everyone. When off the network, we use Fortinet, then log on via a terminal server remote desktop. TS is not particularly compatible with other apps like Zoom and phone systems. So are there any other options?
Yeah, so there are definitely other options. We can establish, if you're already using a Fortinet device, we can actually use Fortinet devices to establish the secure tunnel as is. And so you then, you could then access all those applications and data and things without having to use remote desktop. So it does depend a little bit on how obviously your network and your applications are architected and where particular things are sitting, but generally it would make it easier for the users if the VPN was established using the Fortinet device rather than then trying to use terminal server remote desktop essentially. So not sure whether that answers your question, but there's definitely some options there.
Fantastic, thank you for that. Okay, I think that's just about it. There's no other open questions on there. I think we've answered everything else that we had. We're just about on time anyway, so I think we can probably move on. So look, fantastic, Matthew, absolutely brilliant. I wrote down about 100 different acronyms here, which I'll spend the rest of the afternoon Googling, and I'll give myself a pat on the back. I knew 3 of them, so that's great.
And look, if anyone's got questions too, I'm more than, you know, reach out to me on LinkedIn or something. More than happy to have a chat there. You'll find me easily on that platform, or you know, get in contact via NZSA, and yeah, happy to have a chat. Yeah, look, I think it's really important to, you know, it was an important time for us to have this webinar because it's a really important time and what's been happening. And I think as I said at the start here, the major changes that have really happened have really put a lot of pressure on, I know, IT departments and some organisations have really had to struggle to get systems set up for people to work from home, and a lot of those will still be left, and they're still hanging there, and people are in less than ideal setups. So it's really important time just from our own businesses, but also then for our clients to be making sure that everyone's you know, doing a really good job as far as their security is concerned. Absolutely, yeah, and look, I don't think it requires a big investment for a lot of organisations. It just requires some ongoing investment in things like training and you know, updates and stuff like that, and it will make a big difference to those organisations and their risk levels. Fantastic. So look, I'd just like to say again, Matthew, thank you so much for joining us today. Matthew from Optic Digital and Optic Security Group, as I said, look him up on LinkedIn and do that connection thing, and then I'm sure we'd be happy to help you out if you've got any
any other further inquiries. To the team from ACES and particularly Nairi, thank you so much for jointly hosting this today. I hope everyone's gotten some value out of that and they've enjoyed that over their lunch. I think there's going to be more of this to come. Gary's nodding madly over beside me, so that's great. But to everyone, thank you so much for joining us today, and hope you have a great rest of the day, and hopefully we'll see you again online soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.